I was 69 years old, the day my daughter-in-law, Claire Manning, demanded I hand over my $300,000 house. I refused. She went crazy and threatened to sue me. But when we got to the meeting with my lawyer, he just laughed and shook his head. For the first time in months, I felt powerful, and what he did next completely ruined her plans. But let me tell you how I got to that moment, because the hell didn't start that day. It started much earlier, with little things I didn't want to see. It all began on a Tuesday afternoon. Claire showed up at my house unannounced. She had a folder under her arm and an expression I couldn't decipher until it was too late. Michael, my son, trailed behind her, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the floor. He didn't even greet me with a kiss. He walked straight into the living room, sat on the sofa as if he owned the place, and dropped some papers onto the coffee table. Papers that changed everything. Michael just stood by the door. He didn't look at me. He didn't say anything. He was just there, like a voiceless shadow. Claire spoke first. She told me it was for the best, that Michael needed a solid asset, that I was old now and it didn't make sense for a property of that value to stay in my name when they could make better use of it. She used the word use, as if I were a waste, as if my existence were an obstacle that needed to be removed. The house was worth $300,000. It wasn't a palace, but it was mine. I had bought it with my husband's life insurance money after he died 12 years ago. Every wall held his memory. Every corner smelled like the years we spent together. And now, my own blood wanted to rip that away from me too. I told her no. It was the only thing I could say. A dry, firm no that came from somewhere deep inside I didn't even know still existed. Claire's brow furrowed. Michael looked up for the first time, but said nothing. No defense. No support. Just silence. Then her tone changed. She told me if I didn't sign willingly, she would find a way to make me do it unwillingly. That she had connections. That she knew lawyers. That she could prove I was no longer fit to manage my own assets. She said the word incapable with a cold smile, as if it were a gift wrapped in a threat. I got up from my chair. I asked them to leave. Claire gathered her papers calmly, as if she had already won. Michael looked at me for a second, and I swear I saw something in his eyes. Something like shame. But it wasn't enough. He said nothing. He did nothing. He followed her out like a man with no will of his own. When I closed the door, I stood in the hallway, trembling. Not from fear, from rage, from sadness. From a mixture of everything that builds up when you realize the people you loved most in life see you as something to be moved out of the way. I went to the kitchen. I had made tea, like I always did when Michael came to visit. But he hadn't taken a single sip. The cup was still full, cold, abandoned, just like me. I sat at that empty table and allowed myself to cry, not with sobs, just silent tears that rolled down without permission. I couldn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, remembering the years when Michael was a boy, remembering when he would hug me before bed, when he told me I was the best mom in the world, when he promised he would always take care of me. And now here he was, standing by that woman's side, demanding I gift him my entire life. I thought about calling him. I picked up the phone several times, but I always put it back down on the nightstand. What was I going to say? That I was hurt? That I felt betrayed? That I needed him to choose just once to be on my side? No, I wasn't going to beg him. I wasn't going to humiliate myself any more than they already had. The following days were worse. Michael didn't call. Not a text. Not an apology. Nothing. Claire, on the other hand, did. She sent me a long message full of nice words and cold arguments. She said she was doing it for the good of the family, that I didn't understand the needs of the new generations, that they had plans, projects, dreams that required financial stability, and that my house was the solution. I read that message 5 times. Each time I got angrier. I deleted her number. I blocked her contact. But the damage was already done, because it wasn't just what she said. It was that Michael didn't defend me. It was that my own son had abandoned me to that woman. I started to remember things, little things I had ignored before. Like the time they organized a family dinner and didn't invite me. Michael told me it was an oversight. that they were very busy, that next time would be different. But there was never a next time. Or when I turned 68 and no one came to visit me. Claire posted photos on social media of a trip they took that same day, smiling, happy, without me. I always found excuses. I always justified it. I always said they were busy, that they had their own lives, that I couldn't demand their attention. But now it all made sense. It wasn't carelessness. It was intentional. They were erasing me, little by little, silently, and I had let it happen. One afternoon, while I was cleaning the living room, I found an old photo. It was of Michael when he was 10 years old. We were at the park. He had ice cream on his face, and I was hugging him. We were both laughing. I stared at that picture for hours. What had happened? At what point did that boy turn into a man who saw me as a problem? I cried again, but this time was different. Because along with the sadness, something else began to grow. Something cold, something hard. A certainty. I wasn't going to let them take the only thing I had left. I wasn't going to give away my dignity. I wasn't going to sign those papers. And if Claire wanted a fight, she was going to get one. I looked in my address book for the number of the lawyer who had helped my husband years ago. Stephen Wallace. A serious man, firm in his word, who had always been fair with us. I dialed his number with trembling hands. He answered on the third ring. I explained the situation. He listened in silence. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then he told me something I'll never forget. He told me not to worry, to come to his office the next day, and to bring every document I had on the house. That night I slept a little better, not because the problem was solved, but because for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't alone, that someone was listening to me, that someone believed me, and that maybe, just maybe, there was still a way to get out of this with my head held high. That morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. It hadn't been a dream. It was all real. My son wanted to take my house, and I was alone, trying to understand how I had reached this point. I got up before dawn. I made coffee, even though I knew I wouldn't be able to drink it. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands trembling around the hot mug, and let my mind travel back. Because this hadn't started suddenly. There had been signs, small exclusions I had ignored, thinking they were coincidences. But now, with the pain fresh in my chest, it all made sense. I remembered last Christmas, Michael had called me 2 days before to tell me they wouldn't be able to come, that they had plans with Claire's family, that he was very sorry, that they would make it up to me later. I told him not to worry, that I understood, that it was normal for them to want to spend time with everyone. But on the afternoon of December 25th, while I was eating alone in front of the television, I saw the photos Claire had posted on social media. They were in my city, at a restaurant 15 minutes from my house, celebrating with friends, laughing, toasting. They weren't with her family. They were here, close. And they hadn't come to see me. I called Michael that night. I asked him if everything was okay. He said yes, that they were tired, that they'd had a long day. He didn't mention the restaurant. He didn't mention the photos. And I said nothing. I just swallowed the pain and moved on. Then there was my granddaughter Sophia's birthday, Michael's daughter. She was 7 years old, and I adored her. I bought her a pink dress I had seen in a store downtown. I spent more than I should have, but I wanted her to know her grandmother was thinking of her. I sent Michael a message, asking when I could stop by to drop it off. He replied 3 days later. He told me they were very busy, that it would be better to just leave it at the front desk of his apartment building. At the front desk, like it was any other package. As if I didn't even deserve 5 minutes to see my granddaughter. I left the dress wrapped with a big bow and a card that said, "My Sophia, with all my love, Grandma Eleanor." I never knew if she received it. They never called to thank me. I never saw a photo of her wearing it. Again, I told myself they were busy, that modern times were like this, that families didn't work like they used to, but the truth was different. The truth was they were pushing me away. I also remembered Mother's Day 6 months ago. I waited all morning for a call. Nothing. Around noon, I sent them a message. I told them I loved them, that I hoped to see them soon. Michael replied with a heart emoji. Nothing more. Not a word. Not an apology. Just an empty heart on a cold screen. Claire didn't respond. That night I saw her social media again. They had gone to lunch with Claire's mom. The photos showed a table full of food, flowers, hugs. Claire's mom was smiling, surrounded by her family. I was in my house, looking at those images, feeling invisible. There were more, many more times, like when they hosted a get-together to introduce the new neighbors in their building. I found out from a cousin who was there. She told me it had been a nice afternoon, that Michael had cooked, that everyone had brought something. I wasn't invited. When I asked Michael why they hadn't told me, he replied that it had been a last-minute thing, that they didn't want to bother me, that they knew I didn't get along well with a lot of people. A lie. I had always gotten along with everyone. I was always kind, generous, willing, but that was the excuse he used to justify my absence, or that time they had car trouble and needed money urgently. Michael called me crying. He said he didn't know what to do, that they needed $2,000 to fix it, that if they didn't, they wouldn't be able to work. I didn't think twice. I went to the bank that same afternoon and transferred him the money. I told him not to worry. That's what his mother was for. 3 months went by and they never paid me back. They also never thanked me beyond a quick message the day I gave them the money. But when I needed help changing a light bulb in the ceiling that had burned out, I asked Michael to come over. He told me he was too busy, that I should just call an electrician. An electrician charged me $50 for something that would have taken him 10 minutes. Every memory was another stone on my chest. Every exclusion, every lie, every moment they chose others over me, now had weight. Now it truly hurt. Because these weren't mistakes, they weren't oversights. It was a pattern, a silent plan to erase me from their lives without me even realizing it. I got up from the table and went to my bedroom. I opened the drawer where I kept old letters. I found one Michael had written to me when he was 15. He was at summer camp and missed me. The letter said, "Mom, I miss you so much. I can't wait to come home. You're the best mom in the world. I love you." I pressed that letter to my chest and cried. I cried for that boy who loved me. I cried for the man he had become. I cried for everything we had lost. But I also felt something else. I felt rage, because I didn't deserve this. I had given everything. I had worked double shifts so Michael could go to college. I had given up my dreams so he could achieve his. I had been there through every sickness, every failure, every difficult moment. And now? Now they treated me like I was a piece of old furniture that was no longer useful. I put the letter back in the drawer. I splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw a 69-year-old woman, tired, with deep wrinkles around her eyes. But I also saw something else. I saw determination. I wasn't going to let them keep treating me like this. I wasn't going to let Claire take the only thing I had left. And I wasn't going to stay silent while my son abandoned me. That afternoon, before going to the appointment with Stephen Wallace, I gathered all the important documents: the deed to the house, my husband's death certificate, the property tax receipts, everything I might need. I put them in an old brown folder. That folder had belonged to my husband. He used it to keep important papers. Now I would use it to defend myself. I looked at the clock. 2 hours until the appointment. I changed my clothes. I put on a simple gray dress and pulled my hair back. I wanted to look dignified. I wanted Stephen to know I wasn't there to play the victim. I was there to fight. Before leaving, I stopped in front of the photo of my husband hanging in the living room. I spoke to him in a low voice, as I sometimes did when I felt alone. I told him, "I'm not going to let them take this from us. I'm not going to let them forget who we are." I locked the door of my house. I walked to the bus stop with the folder under my arm and my heart pounding. I didn't know what was going to happen in that meeting. I didn't know if Stephen could help me. But I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer going to be the woman who stayed quiet. I was no longer going to justify the unjustifiable. I was no longer going to let them erase me. I was going to fight. And if I had to do it alone, I would. The bus was crowded. I sat by the window and held the folder against my chest. Outside, the city rushed by, but I barely saw it. My mind was trapped on a single thought. My son had abandoned me. It wasn't a suspicion. It wasn't an exaggeration. It was a fact, and accepting it hurt more than any physical blow. Because it's one thing to be betrayed by a stranger, it's something else entirely when it's done by the person you carried in your womb. The person you gave everything to without asking for anything in return. I looked out the window and saw a young mother walking hand in hand with her son. The boy was laughing. She looked at him with tenderness, and I felt a pang in my chest so strong I had to close my eyes. When was the last time Michael had looked at me like that? When was the last time he held my hand? When did he stop seeing me as his mother and start seeing me as an obstacle? I didn't know. And that was the worst part. That there hadn't been a clear moment. There was no big fight. No slamming door. Just a slow, silent, drifting away that I hadn't known how to stop. The bus screeched to a halt, and I almost lost my balance. I grabbed the seat in front of me and took a deep breath. I had to focus. I had to get to that office with a clear mind. I got off 3 blocks before my stop. I needed to walk. I needed air. I needed to gather my thoughts before facing Stephen. The streets were quiet. It was mid-afternoon, and the sun was strong. I walked slowly, feeling the weight of the folder in my hands. Every step brought me closer to a truth I could no longer deny. My family had cast me aside, and now they wanted to take the only thing I had left. I arrived at the building where Stephen's office was. It was an old place, one of those with brick walls and wooden stairs that creaked underfoot. I climbed slowly, holding onto the railing. The door had a gold plaque that read, "Stephen Wallace, Attorney at Law." I knocked twice and waited. A man in his 60s, with completely white hair and thick-framed glasses, opened the door. He recognized me immediately. "Eleanor," he said with a warm smile. "Please, come in." I entered a small but tidy office. There were bookshelves filled with files, a dark wooden desk, and 2 chairs in front of it. Everything smelled like old paper and fresh coffee. Stephen offered me a seat and sat across from me. He looked at me intently, as if he could read everything I wasn't saying. "Tell me everything from the beginning," he said in a soft voice. And I did. I told him about Claire and Michael's visit, about the papers they wanted me to sign, about the threats, about the abandonment, about all the times they had excluded me. I spoke without stopping for nearly 20 minutes. Stephen didn't interrupt me once. He just nodded, took notes, and looked at me with a mix of concern and something else. Something I couldn't identify until later. When I finished, there was a long silence. Stephen set his pen on the desk and leaned back in his chair. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Eleanor," he said finally, "do you have any idea why your daughter-in-law wants this house so desperately?" I shook my head. "I suppose for the money," I replied. "It's worth $300,000. That's not a small amount." Stephen nodded slowly. "But there's something more," he said. "No one threatens legal action for a house unless they have a plan." "A specific plan." I leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "I mean your daughter-in-law doesn't just want your house. She wants you out of the way. And she probably has debts or financial problems you don't know about." I felt a chill. "How do you know?" "Because I've seen many cases like this," Stephen replied. "And there's always a pattern. First, they isolate you. Then they convince you you're a burden. And finally, they take everything, making you believe it's for your own good." That was exactly what was happening. Every word from Stephen resonated in my head like a painful echo. "So what can I do?" I asked, my voice breaking. Stephen smiled, a small smile, but full of confidence. "You can fight, Eleanor. And you can win. But I need you to trust me." He nodded. "I trust you," I said. "We always trusted you." Stephen opened one of his desk drawers and took out a folder. He opened it in front of me and began to explain the steps we were going to take. "First," he said, "we're going to review all your documents. I want to make sure your house is completely in your name and that there are no debts or liens they can use against you." I took the papers out of my folder and handed them to him. Stephen reviewed them carefully, one by one. He would nod, frown, take notes. "Everything is in order," he said after a while. "The house is yours. There are no debts. There is nothing they can legally use to take it from you." I felt an enormous sense of relief. "Then they can't do anything," I said, almost whispering. Stephen looked me straight in the eye. Legally, no. But that doesn't mean they won't try. They're going to pressure you. They're going to threaten you. They're going to try to make you feel guilty. And if that doesn't work, they're going to find a way to have you declared incompetent. Incompetent. That word again. The same one Claire had used. Can they do that? I asked, scared. They can try, Stephen answered. But they won't succeed. Not while I'm here. So what do we do now? Now we wait, he said calmly. Let them make their next move. And when they do, we'll be ready. I didn't really understand what he meant, but I nodded anyway. I trusted him. I didn't have many options. Stephen closed the folder and stood up. He walked me to the door. Before opening it, he put a hand on my shoulder. Eleanor, he said firmly, you are not a burden. You are not a problem. And no one has the right to take what is yours. Do you understand me? I nodded, my eyes filling with tears. Good, he said. Now go home. Rest. And don't sign anything. Absolutely nothing. Not even if they beg you on their knees. I left that office feeling different. Not lighter. Not less sad. But stronger. Because for the first time in a long time, someone was on my side. The ride back was quiet. I got on the bus and stared out the window, thinking about everything Stephen had told me. Claire didn't just want my house. She wanted to erase me. She wanted me to disappear so they could move on without remorse. But I wasn't going to disappear. I wasn't going to sign. I wasn't going to give away my life. I got home as it was getting dark. I opened the door, turned on the lights, and stood in the living room, looking at everything around me. This house was mine. Every piece of furniture, every memory, every corner. I had bought it with my husband's insurance money. I had maintained it with my work. I had filled it with love for years, and no one was going to take it from me. I went to the kitchen and made myself some tea. I sat at the table and took a deep breath. I felt something inside me had changed. I was no longer the woman who justified everything. I was no longer the mother begging for attention. Now, I was a woman who knew her worth, and who was ready to fight for what was hers. That night, before bed, I received a message from Claire. I read it with a racing heart. It said, Eleanor, I hope you've reconsidered your decision. This doesn't have to be difficult. We just want what's best for everyone. Think about it. I didn't reply. I blocked her number, and I turned off my phone. I went to bed with the certainty that the battle was just beginning, but also with the certainty that I was no longer alone, and that this time I wasn't going to lose. 3 days went by with no news. 3 days where I woke up early, checked my phone, and found nothing. No messages from Michael, no calls from Claire, just silence. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl, the kind of silence that comes before the storm. Stephen had told me to wait, to do nothing until they made the next move. So I waited, even though every minute felt like an hour. On the 4th day, my doorbell rang at 9 in the morning. I peeked through the window before opening. It was a man I didn't know. He was wearing a dark suit and carrying a briefcase. I opened the door just a crack. Yes? I asked cautiously. Mrs. Eleanor Reynolds? He asked in a formal voice. Yes, that's me. I have a court summons for you. He handed me a manila envelope. You need to sign here to confirm you received it. I felt the floor move beneath my feet. I signed with a trembling hand and took the envelope. The man left without another word. I closed the door and stood in the hallway, staring at that envelope as if it were a bomb about to explode. It had a courthouse seal and my name written in large letters. They had done it. Claire had followed through on her threat. I sat on the sofa and opened the envelope with clumsy fingers. Inside were several papers filled with legal words I could barely understand. But there was one phrase I understood perfectly. Petition for declaration of incapacity to manage assets. Claire was asking for me to be declared incompetent, to have my right to manage my own house, my own money, my own life, taken away. The tears started to fall uncontrollably. Not from sadness, from rage, from indignation. How dared they? How could they do this? I grabbed the phone and called Stephen. He answered on the second ring. I got a court summons. I told him, my voice breaking. They want to declare me incompetent. Calm down, Eleanor, he replied calmly. This is exactly what I expected them to do. Can you come to my office right now? Yes, I'm on my way. Bring all the papers. And Eleanor? Breathe. This isn't going to go the way they think. I hung up the phone, grabbed my purse, and ran out of the house. The bus took an eternity to arrive. When I finally got on, I sat by the window and clutched the papers to my chest. I arrived at Stephen's office almost breathless. I knocked on the door, and he opened it immediately. He ushered me in and closed the door behind me. Sit down, he said, pointing to the chair in front of his desk. Show me everything. I handed him the papers. Stephen read them carefully, shaking his head from time to time. When he finished, he put the documents on the desk and looked at me. And then something happened that I'll never forget. Stephen started to laugh. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was a laugh of disbelief, of surprise, as if he had just read something ridiculous. He leaned forward, put his elbows on the desk, and shook his head. I can't believe they were this foolish, he said, still smiling. I looked at him, not understanding. Foolish? I asked, confused. What are you talking about? Stephen picked up the papers and pointed to a section. Look at this, Eleanor. They're basing their petition on the claim that you can't manage your assets because you supposedly have memory problems and make irrational decisions. Yes, I read that, I said, pained. They say I'm a confused old woman. Stephen smiled again. That's exactly the problem, he said. They don't have any medical proof, no psychological report, no document to back up that claim. It's just their word. And that's good for me? It's excellent for you, Stephen replied, because it means their case is weak, very weak. Any judge is going to ask for proof, and when they can't provide it, the case will fall apart on its own. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. So they can't win, I said, almost whispering. Not only can they not win, Stephen said, leaning back in his chair. We're going to use this in your favor. How? Stephen opened a drawer and pulled out another folder. He placed it in front of me and opened it. While they were wasting their time building this ridiculous case, I did some research of my own. What kind of research? On your daughter-in-law, Stephen replied. Claire Manning. I felt a chill. What did you find? Stephen took several papers from the folder and placed them on the desk, one by one. Debts. Eleanor. A lot of debts. I leaned forward to see better. There were bank statements, credit reports, collection notices. Claire has debts of over $80,000, Stephen continued. Credit cards, personal loans, a car loan she hasn't paid in 6 months. She's drowning financially. How did you get this? I asked, astonished. I have connections, Stephen replied with a smile. And when someone tries to harm a client of mine, I make sure I know exactly who we're dealing with. I looked at the papers, unable to believe what I was seeing. $80,000. Claire was desperate for money. That's why she wanted my house. It wasn't for Michael. It wasn't for the family. It was for her debts, for her greed. There's more, Stephen said, pulling out another document. Claire tried to sell a property that was in her mother's name 2 years ago. She forged her signature on the sale documents. The mother sued her and won. There's a court judgment against her. I couldn't speak. I just stared at those papers, feeling how everything was starting to fit together. Your daughter-in-law is a con artist, Eleanor, Stephen said seriously, and your son probably has no idea about half the things she does. Does Michael know about the debts? I asked in a small voice. I don't know, Stephen replied, but what I do know is that she's using him. She's manipulating him to get your house, and when she gets it, she'll probably leave him. I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because now I understood what was happening. Sadness because my son was trapped in this woman's claws. What do we do now? I asked. Now we prepare our defense, Stephen answered, and we fight back. When we get to the hearing, we are going to present all this information. We are going to prove that you are perfectly capable, and we are going to expose Claire for who she really is. When is the hearing? In 2 weeks, Stephen said. We have plenty of time to prepare. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the weight of everything I had just discovered. Claire wasn't just a difficult daughter-in-law. She was a criminal, a manipulator, a woman capable of anything for money. And my son was married to her. Stephen stood up and walked around the desk. He sat in the chair next to me and put a hand on my shoulder. "Eleanor, listen to me carefully," he said firmly. "I know this hurts. I know it's hard to accept that your family is doing this to you, but you have to be strong. You have to trust that we are going to win this." I nodded, wiping away tears. "I trust you, Stephen." "Good," he said, "because this is just beginning. And when we're done, Claire is going to wish she had never met you." I left that office feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: power. For the first time since this all began, I was in control. I walked down the street with my head held high. The sun was shining brightly. People rushed past me, but I walked slowly, savoring that moment of clarity. Claire had made a mistake. She had underestimated old Eleanor Reynolds. She had thought I was weak, that I was easy to manipulate, that I would stay quiet. But she was wrong. I got home and sat in the living room. I looked around at all the memories those walls held, and I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to let them take anything from me. Not my house. Not my dignity. Not my right to live in peace. I was going to fight, and with Stephen by my side, I was going to win. That night I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, because now I knew the truth. And the truth, even though it hurt, had set me free. The following days were a strange mix of fear and determination. Stephen had asked me to gather all possible information about my life, my health, my finances, everything that could prove I was perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. I got up early every morning and started organizing everything. I pulled old folders out of closets. I went through drawers full of papers. I looked for every receipt, every bill, every document that could help. I found my bank statements from the last 2 years. All my utility payments were up to date. Not a single late bill, not a single debt, everything in perfect order. I also found the prescriptions from my doctor. I took medication for blood pressure. Nothing else. My last blood tests were normal. My last checkup had been 3 weeks ago, and everything was fine. I called my doctor and asked for an urgent appointment. I needed a full medical report. She saw me that same afternoon. Dr. Evelyn Reed was a woman in her 50s, kind and professional. She had been my doctor for the last 10 years and knew me well. I explained the situation. I told her about the lawsuit, about Claire's accusations. The doctor listened attentively, shaking her head in disapproval. "That's ridiculous, Eleanor," she said firmly. "You are perfectly fine, physically and mentally. Can you give me a document certifying that?" I asked urgently. "Of course," she replied. "I'm going to give you a full exam right now, and I'll give you a detailed report." I spent the next hour answering questions, doing memory tests, coordination tests, reasoning tests. The doctor had me recall dates, names, addresses. She asked me to solve simple math problems, to describe my daily routine. "Everything is perfect," she said at the end. "Your memory is intact. Your reasoning ability is normal for your age. There is no sign of cognitive decline." I felt an enormous sense of relief. "Will you give me the report in writing?" "I'm preparing it right now," she replied, typing on her computer. "You'll have it ready in 2 days. And Eleanor, if you need me to testify on your behalf, count on me." "Thank you, doctor," I said, my eyes filling with tears. "You don't know how much this means to me." I left that office feeling stronger. I had proof. I had documents. I had the truth on my side. That afternoon, Stephen called me. "Eleanor, I need you to come to my office tomorrow. I have more information on Claire. Information that's going to change everything." I arrived at his office early the next day. Stephen was waiting for me with a new folder on his desk. This one was thicker than the last. "Sit down," he said, with a serious expression. "What I'm about to show you isn't easy to see, but you need to know." He opened the folder and took out several documents. "I hired a private investigator," he began to explain. "Someone who could dig deeper into Claire's past." "And what did he find?" I asked, my heart racing. "For starters, Claire Manning isn't her real name. I froze. What? Her real name is Claire Sophia Dominguez, Stephen continued. She legally changed her last name 7 years ago, right before she met Michael. Why would she do that? Because she was running from her past, Stephen replied, showing me another document. Claire has a criminal record in another state. She was charged with financial fraud 8 years ago. She convinced an elderly couple to invest their savings in a fake business. She stole almost $100,000 from them. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And did she go to jail? No, Stephen said. She reached an out-of-court settlement. She returned part of the money, and the victims dropped the charges. But the case is in the court records. My hands were shaking. That woman was a criminal, a professional con artist, and she was married to my son. There's more, Stephen continued, pulling out photographs. The investigator followed her for a week. Claire met with a different lawyer 3 times. Not the one listed on your summons. Why? Stephen put the photos in front of me. In one, Claire was leaving an office with a man in a suit. In another, they were sitting in a coffee shop, reviewing papers. In the third, Claire was handing him an envelope. That lawyer specializes in wills and estates, Stephen explained. I don't think Claire just wants your house now. She has a long-term plan. What kind of plan? I asked, scared. Stephen looked me directly in the eye. I think she's planning something more serious, Eleanor. If she manages to have you declared incompetent, she and Michael would become your legal guardians. They would have total control over your assets. And after that, he paused, but I understood what he wasn't saying. After that, anything could happen. I finished the sentence in a trembling voice. Stephen nodded. I've seen cases like this before. Elderly people declared incompetent, isolated from their families, stripped of everything. And sometimes, Eleanor, those people end up in nursing homes where no one visits them, where no one remembers them. I felt a coldness run through my entire body. Claire didn't just want my house. She wanted to make me disappear, erase me completely from my son's life, from my granddaughter's life, from my own life. I'm not going to let that happen, I said with a firmness that surprised even me. I know, Stephen replied with a smile. That's why we're gathering all this evidence. When we get to that hearing, we are going to expose everything, every lie, every fraud, every evil plan of that woman. Does Michael know any of this? I asked painfully. I don't think so, Stephen said. Everything indicates he's being manipulated. Claire is an expert at that. She knows how to control people, how to make them believe she's the victim. I have to talk to him, I said, getting up from the chair. Stephen stopped me. No, Eleanor, not yet. If you tell him anything now, he'll tell Claire, and she'll change her strategy. We need the element of surprise. But he's my son, I said with tears. I can't just leave him in that woman's hands without doing anything. And you're not going to, Stephen assured me. But you have to trust the process. When the time comes, Michael will see the truth. I promise you. I sat back down, wiping my tears. Stephen was right. I couldn't risk Claire finding out what we knew. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing every document. Stephen took notes, organized the evidence, prepared our strategy. We're going to need witnesses, he said at one point. People who can testify that you are perfectly capable. Do you have close friends? Neighbors who know you well? I thought of Carol, my neighbor for years. A woman my age who lived in the house next door. We had coffee together every week. She knew me better than anyone. Yes, I replied. I have Carol. She can testify for me. Perfect, Stephen said, writing down the name. Talk to her. Explain the situation. And tell her we'll probably call her to testify. I will, I promised. Stephen closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. Eleanor, he said seriously, I want you to be prepared for what's coming. The hearing won't be easy. Claire is going to lie. She's going to cry. She's going to try to paint you as a confused old woman. She'll say she only wants to protect you. I nodded. I know. But we have the truth, Stephen continued, and the truth always wins. It might take time. It might hurt. But in the end, it always wins. I left his office with the folder full of evidence under my arm. I walked through the streets feeling the weight of everything I had discovered. Claire was worse than I had imagined. She wasn't just an ambitious daughter-in-law. She was a criminal, a professional liar, a woman with no morals. And my son was married to her. My son, who was once a sweet, loving boy, was now trapped in that woman's web. I got home and went straight to Carol's house. I knocked on the door, and she opened it with a smile. "Eleanor, what a surprise," she said, inviting me in. "Want some coffee?" "Yes, please," I replied. "And I need to talk to you. It's important." We sat in her kitchen, and I told her everything, every detail, every document, every painful truth. Carol listened without interrupting, shaking her head in disbelief. When I finished, she took my hands in hers. "Eleanor, that woman is a monster," she said firmly. "Of course I'll testify for you. I'll tell the judge the truth, that you are one of the most capable and dignified women I know." "Thank you, Carol," I said with tears. "You don't know how much I needed to hear that." That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I felt something different. It wasn't just determination, it was certainty. Certainty that I was going to win, that I was going to expose Claire, that I was going to get my son back, because now I had everything I needed. Proof, witnesses, the truth. And the truth, as Stephen had said, always wins. It was 5 days until the hearing. 5 days that felt like an eternity and a split second at the same time. Stephen had told me to be ready for anything, that Claire would probably try something before the court date. And he was right. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Michael showed up at my door. Alone, without Claire. He rang the doorbell twice and waited. I looked through the window and felt my heart tighten. My son was there, standing on the doorstep of the house where he grew up, his hands in his pockets, his gaze lost. I opened the door slowly. "Hi, Mom," he said in a low voice. "Hello, Michael," I replied, maintaining my composure. "Can I come in?" he asked. "I need to talk to you." I hesitated for a second, but finally stepped aside. He came in and stood in the living room like a stranger in his own home. "Want some coffee?" I offered out of habit. "No, thanks," he replied. "I just want to talk." We sat on the sofa, side by side, but with an immense distance between us. Michael stared at the floor. I waited. "Mom," he finally began, "I know things are difficult. I know you and Claire don't get along. But this doesn't have to go to court." "I'm not the one taking this to court, Michael," I said calmly. "Claire did. She sued me. She accused me of being incompetent." He rubbed his face with his hands. "I know, Mom. I know. But she's worried about you. We're worried about you." "Worried?" I repeated, feeling the anger rise. "Michael, your wife wants to take my house. She wants to declare me incompetent. And you're telling me she's worried?" "She thinks it's for the best," he insisted, not looking at me. "She thinks you can't take care of yourself anymore. That you need help." "I don't need help," I said firmly. "I pay my bills. I go to my doctor's appointments. I maintain my house. What more do you want me to do to prove I'm fine?" Michael finally looked at me. His eyes were tired. "Mom, you don't understand the financial situation. We have expenses. Sophia needs things. Claire and I are struggling to get by." There it was. The truth. It wasn't about my well-being. It was about money. "And you think my house is the solution?" I said bitterly. He didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. "Michael," I said, taking a breath, "do you know how much this house is worth?" $300,000, he replied. "And do you know how I bought it?" "With Dad's insurance," he said, looking down. "Exactly," I continued, "with your father's life insurance money. The man who worked his whole life to give us a home. Who killed himself working so you could go to college? Who left that money so I could have something when he was gone?" "Mom, it's not just about the money." Michael tried to defend himself. "Then what is it about?" I asked, raising my voice. "Why is Claire threatening me? Why is she suing me? Why do you both exclude me from your lives and now show up demanding I give you everything?" Michael stood up. "I didn't come here to fight, Mom. I came to ask you to reconsider, to think about the family." I stood up too. "I have always thought about the family, Michael. Always. But you don't think about me. You only think about what you can get. That's not true, he said, his voice breaking. Isn't it? I confronted him. When was the last time you invited me to dinner? When was the last time you brought Sophia to visit me? When was the last time you called just to see how I was? Michael had no answer. He just stood there, looking at me with a mix of guilt and frustration. Mom, please, he said finally, don't let this destroy our family. I'm not destroying anything, I replied, tears in my eyes. You two already did. Michael walked to the door. Before leaving, he stopped and turned around. Claire was right, he said coldly. You're not the same. You've become bitter. Selfish. Those words hit me like a rock in the chest. Leave, I told him, barely a whisper. Get out of my house. And he left. The door closed, and I was left alone in the middle of the living room, shaking with rage and pain. I sank onto the sofa and cried. I cried for the son I had lost. I cried for the words he had said to me. I cried because he had called me selfish when I had given him everything. But in the midst of the pain, I also felt something else. I felt clarity. Michael was completely under Claire's control. She had brainwashed him. She had made him believe I was the problem. I picked up the phone and called Stephen. I told him what had happened. He listened in silence. That was to be expected, he said when I finished. That was Claire's last attempt to make you sign. She sent Michael to manipulate you emotionally. It's a classic tactic. Well, it didn't work, I said, wiping my tears. I know, Stephen replied, proud. And that's going to make her more desperate. Stay alert, Eleanor. Don't open the door to anyone you don't know. Don't sign anything. And if they come looking for you again, call me immediately. I will, I promised. The next few days were tense. I spent my time looking out the window, expecting someone to show up, but no one came. Stephen and I met 2 more times to go over everything. We practiced the questions the judge might ask me. We reviewed every document, every piece of evidence, every testimony. Dr. Evelyn gave me her medical report. It was detailed and clear. It certified that I was in perfect physical and mental condition, that there was no sign of cognitive decline, that I was completely capable of making my own decisions. Carol had also prepared her testimony. She told me she was going to tell the judge the truth, that I was a strong, independent, capable woman, that we saw each other every week and she could confirm I was perfectly fine. Stephen organized everything into separate folders. One for the financial documents, another for the medical reports, another for the evidence against Claire, and another for the testimonies. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, looking at the old photos hanging on the walls. Photos of Michael as a child, photos of my husband, photos of happier times. I wondered how we had gotten here, how a family that was once close was now shattered, how love had turned into lawsuits. But I also reminded myself why I was fighting, not just for the house, not just for the money, but for my dignity, for my right to live my life without anyone controlling me, for my right to be treated with respect. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at myself. I saw a 69-year-old woman with deep wrinkles and gray hair. But I also saw a woman who had survived her husband's death, who had raised a son alone, who had worked hard her whole life. I saw a woman who deserved respect. That morning, I showered calmly. I got dressed in my best clothes, a simple beige suit that made me look dignified. I pulled my hair back into a low bun. I put on a little makeup. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman ready to fight. Stephen picked me up early. He arrived in his old but clean car. He opened the door for me and helped me in. "Ready?" he asked with a smile. "Ready?" I replied firmly. The drive to the courthouse was silent. Stephen drove calmly while I looked out the window. The city was waking up slowly. People were walking to their jobs. Children were going to school. Everything seemed normal. But for me, this was the most important day of my life. We arrived at the courthouse and went up the stairs. It was an old building, with long hallways and heavy wooden doors. Stephen carried all the folders. I clutched my purse to my chest. We sat on a bench outside the courtroom. We waited in silence. And then I saw them arrive. Michael and Claire. She was wearing an elegant gray suit. Her hair was perfectly styled, and her makeup was flawless. She looked like a professional, concerned, responsible woman. But I knew the truth. I knew who she really was. Michael looked at me for a second. Then he looked away. They sat on the bench on the other side of the hall, as far away from us as possible. Claire looked at me with a cold smile. A smile that said, "I've already won." But I didn't look away. I stared right back at her, with all the strength I had inside. And in that moment, I knew something for certain. Today, I was going to unmask that woman. Today, I was going to expose all her lies. Today, I was going to show who Eleanor Reynolds really was. And no one, absolutely no one, was going to take what was mine. The courtroom door opened, and an officer motioned for us to enter. Stephen helped me to my feet. My legs were shaking, but I walked with my head held high. The room was smaller than I had imagined. There were wooden benches, a raised platform where the judge sat, and 2 tables facing each other. One for us, one for Claire and Michael. The judge was an older man, about 65, with glasses and a serious expression. His name was Arthur Price, according to the plaque on his desk. "All rise," the officer ordered. Judge Price entered, and we all stood. When he sat, we did the same. The judge reviewed some papers in front of him and then looked at us. "We are here for the petition for declaration of incapacity filed by Mrs. Claire Manning Reynolds against Mrs. Eleanor Reynolds," he said in a firm voice. I felt a chill hearing my names in that official context. "We will proceed first with the petitioner," the judge continued. "Mrs. Manning, you may begin." Claire stood up. She looked serene, confident. She began to speak in a soft, concerned voice. "Your Honor," she began, "I come here today because of my mother-in-law, Eleanor Reynolds. She is a woman I love and respect deeply. But in recent months, I have noticed troubling changes in her behavior. A lie, the first of many. She has forgotten important appointments," Claire continued. "She has had trouble paying her bills on time. She has made irrational financial decisions. We, her family, are worried about her well-being." The judge listened without expression. "Do you have proof of these behaviors?" he asked. Claire took some papers from her folder. "I have testimonies here from neighbors who have seen my mother-in-law confused. I have utility receipts that were supposedly not paid on time." Stephen leaned toward me and whispered, "Lies. All lies." The judge took the papers and reviewed them. "Anything else?" Claire nodded. "Your Honor, my mother-in-law's house is worth $300,000. It is her only asset. If something happens to her, if she makes wrong decisions, she could lose everything. We just want to protect her." Protect her. The word made me sick. Michael stood up then. "Your Honor, may I add something?" he said in a shaky voice. "Go ahead," the judge replied. "My mother has always been a strong woman," Michael said. "But since my father died, she's changed. She has isolated herself. She has refused our help. We're worried she can't take care of herself." Hearing my own son say those words was like being stabbed, but I remained firm. I wasn't going to cry. "Not here." The judge wrote something on his papers. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, looking at me, "do you have anything to say?" Stephen stood up. "Your Honor, with your permission, I would like to present our defense in full." "Proceed," said the judge. Stephen walked to the center of the room with one of the folders in his hand. "Your Honor, what we have just heard are baseless accusations, and I am going to prove it, point by point." He opened the folder and took out the first documents. First, the financial problems. Here are Mrs. Reynolds' bank statements from the last 2 years. All payments are up to date. There is not a single late bill. There are no debts. He handed the papers to the judge. He reviewed them carefully. "Second," Stephen continued, "the alleged mental deterioration. I have here a complete medical report from Dr. Evelyn Reed, who has been Mrs. Reynolds' doctor for 10 years. The report certifies that she is in perfect physical and mental condition." Another stack of documents for the judge. "Dr. Reed is present here to testify if Your Honor deems it necessary," Stephen added, motioning to the back, where the doctor was seated. The judge nodded. "I'll take that into consideration." Stephen took a step forward. "But there is something else, Your Honor. Something that completely changes the landscape of this case." The judge looked up. "What is it?" Stephen turned and looked at me. It was time. The moment we had planned. Your Honor, Stephen said in a firm voice, Mrs. Claire Manning is not here out of concern. She is here out of greed. Claire immediately jumped to her feet. That's a lie, she shouted. How dare you? Order, the judge said, banging his gavel. Mrs. Manning, sit down. Counselor, present your evidence. Stephen took out another folder. This was the thickest one, the one that held all the truth. Your Honor, Mrs. Claire Manning has debts of over $80,000, Stephen began. Credit cards, personal loans, a car loan in default. Here are all the documents. He handed the papers to the judge. Claire had turned pale. Furthermore, Stephen continued, Mrs. Manning has a criminal record. She was charged with financial fraud 8 years ago. She swindled an elderly couple out of almost $100,000. No, Claire whispered. That was a misunderstanding? Stephen asked, raising his voice. A misunderstanding that ended up in court records? A misunderstanding that forced you to legally change your last name to escape your past? Michael had stood up. What are you talking about? He asked Claire. What is all this? Claire didn't answer. She just stared at the floor. And there's more, Your Honor, Stephen continued, relentless. Mrs. Manning has been secretly meeting with a lawyer who specializes in estates. We believe her plan is not only to get Mrs. Reynolds' house, but to have her declared incompetent to control all her assets and eventually get rid of her. That's insane, Claire shouted, her eyes filled with tears. I love my mother-in-law. You love her? Stephen asked. Is that why you excluded her from family events? Why you didn't let her see her granddaughter? Why you systematically isolated her for months to justify this lawsuit? Claire began to cry. But she no longer looked like a concerned woman. She looked like a trapped woman. Your Honor, Stephen said, turning back to the judge. I have witnesses who can confirm that Mrs. Reynolds is perfectly capable. I have documents that prove Mrs. Manning is a con artist with a record. And I have proof that this whole thing is nothing but a scheme to rob an elderly woman of her only asset. The judge looked at the documents, his brow furrowed. He took several minutes to review everything. The silence in the room was thick. Finally, the judge looked up. Mrs. Manning, he said in a severe voice, is it true you have a criminal record for fraud? Claire didn't answer. She just cried. Answer the question, the judge ordered. Yes, she finally said in a broken voice. But it was a long time ago. I've changed. And is it true you have $80,000 in debt? Claire nodded, unable to speak. The judge leaned back in his chair. Mr. Reynolds, he said, looking at Michael. Did you know about your wife's past? Michael shook his head. He was pale as a ghost. No, he whispered. I didn't know anything. The judge closed the folder in front of him and looked at all of us. I've heard enough, he said firmly. This petition for declaration of incapacity is entirely without merit. Mrs. Eleanor Reynolds has proven she is in perfect physical and mental condition to manage her own affairs. I felt the air return to my lungs. Furthermore, the judge continued, the accusations presented by the petitioner appear to be motivated by financial interest and not genuine concern. Therefore, I dismiss this petition in its entirety. He banged the gavel. Case closed. Claire collapsed in her chair. Michael just stood there, looking at me with an expression I couldn't interpret. Surprise, shame, regret. Stephen put a hand on my shoulder. We won, Eleanor, he whispered. We won. The judge stood up and left the room. The officer told us we could leave. I stood up slowly. My legs were still shaking, but now it was from relief, from victory. Claire ran out of the room without looking at anyone. Michael stayed a moment longer, looking at me from a distance. Mom, he said, taking a step toward me, but I held up a hand. Not now, Michael, I said in a firm voice. Not now. He nodded and left after Claire. Stephen hugged me. You did incredible, Eleanor, he said. I'm proud of you. We left the courthouse together. Outside, the sun was shining brightly. I took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill my lungs. Dr. Evelyn and Carol were waiting for me outside. They ran to me and hugged me. We knew you were going to win, Carol said with tears of joy. "You're an amazing woman, Eleanor," the doctor added. The four of us stood there, under the sun, savoring this victory that had cost so much pain. But I knew this wasn't over. I had won the legal battle. But the battle to get my son back was just beginning. 2 weeks passed after the hearing. 2 weeks in which my house once again felt like a home and not a battlefield. 2 weeks in which I could finally sleep in peace. Stephen had called to tell me that Claire had withdrawn any intention of appealing. The case was closed. My house was still mine. My life was still mine. But there was an emptiness that wasn't filled. Michael hadn't called. He hadn't come to see me. He hadn't said a single word since the day of the hearing. I hadn't reached out to him either. I needed time. I needed to heal. I needed to understand how to move forward after everything that had happened. One Thursday afternoon, I was watering the plants in the yard when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and there he was, Michael. Alone. With red eyes and an expression of pain I had never seen on him. "Mom," he said in a broken voice, "can we talk?" I set the watering can on the ground and looked at him. For a moment, I thought about telling him no, about closing the door on him like he had closed his heart to me so many times. But he was my son, and, despite everything, I still loved him. "Come in," I said simply. We went into the living room. Michael sat on the sofa where he had played so many times as a child. I sat across from him in my husband's chair. "I don't know where to start," he said after a long silence. "Start with the truth," I replied calmly. Michael took a deep breath. "I divorced Claire," he said, "a week ago. She's out of my life." I felt a mix of relief and sadness. "And Sophia?" "Sophia is with me," he replied. "Claire tried to take her, but the judge gave me custody. Especially after she found out about Claire's entire history." "Her entire history?" I asked. Michael nodded, his head bowed. "After the hearing, I hired an investigator. I needed to know who I had been married to all these years, and what I found." "Mom, you have no idea. Tell me," I said. "Claire didn't just have debts and a criminal record," he began to explain. "I found out she had been married before, twice, and in both cases, she had done the exact same thing. She would marry men who had elderly parents with property. She would manipulate them, get access to the inheritances, and then she would disappear." I was frozen. It was worse than I had imagined. "I was the third mom," Michael continued, tears in his eyes. "The third idiot who fell into her trap. And I almost lost you because of it." Tears started to roll down his cheeks. I just looked at him, not knowing what to say. "She convinced me you were changing," he said, "that you were becoming difficult, that you didn't love Sophia, that you were rejecting us. It was all a lie. All of it. And I believed her." "Why?" I asked, pained. "Why did you believe her and not me?" Michael covered his face with his hands. "Because it was easier, Mom. Because she made me feel like I was the hero, that I was protecting my family. Because I was a coward who didn't want to see the truth. The silence between us was dense, heavy, filled with years of accumulated pain. When Dad died," Michael continued, "I was lost. I didn't know how to be a man without him. I didn't know how to take care of you. I didn't know how to be a son. And when Claire showed up, she filled that void. She made me feel strong, important. But it was all a lie. I closed my eyes. The pain in his voice was real. But the pain he had caused me was also real." "Mom," Michael said, kneeling in front of me, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I failed you in the worst way possible. I abandoned you when you needed me most. I let that woman almost destroy you, and I can never erase that." I opened my eyes and looked at him. My son, kneeling in front of me, crying like I hadn't seen him cry since he was a child. "But I'm asking you for a chance," he continued. "A chance to show you I can be the son you deserve. A chance for Sophia to truly know her grandmother. A chance to rebuild what I destroyed." I reached out my hand and touched his face. "Michael," I said softly, "you broke my heart. You made me feel invisible. You made me doubt my worth as a mother." "I know," he whispered. "But you are still my son," I continued. "And I am still your mother. And a mother's love isn't erased by mistakes, no matter how big they are. Michael took my hand and pressed it against his cheek. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I let him cry. I let him get out all the pain, all the guilt, all the regret, and I cried too. I cried for everything we had lost, for everything we had suffered. But I also cried with relief, because my son had come back. We stayed like that for a long time, until the tears dried up and all that was left was the warm silence of a family beginning to heal. Want some coffee? I finally asked. Michael smiled for the first time. I'd love some. Mom. I went to the kitchen and made coffee like I used to when he came to visit as a boy, with 2 spoonfuls of sugar and a little milk. I still remembered how he liked it. We sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee in silence. It was a different silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people learning how to be together again. Sophia asks about you, Michael said after a while. Every day she asks me when she's going to see Grandma Eleanor again. I felt my heart fill up. Really? Michael nodded. Claire told her you didn't want to see her, that you were mad at her. But Sophia never fully believed her. She has always loved you. I want to see her, I said urgently. I want to make up for lost time. We can come tomorrow, Michael offered, if you want. Yes, I replied. Please. Michael finished his coffee and stood up. I have to go, he said. Sophia gets out of school in an hour, and I have to pick her up. I walked him to the door. Before leaving, he stopped and hugged me. A long, strong hug, like the ones he used to give me when he was a child. I love you, Mom, he whispered. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving I deserve your forgiveness. I already forgave you, Michael, I said, hugging him tighter. Now you have to forgive yourself. He left with a sad but hopeful smile. I stayed at the door, watching him walk away, feeling something inside me begin to heal. The next day, the doorbell rang at 4 in the afternoon. I opened the door, and there was Sophia, my granddaughter, 8 years old, with her huge smile. Grandma, she shouted, throwing herself into my arms. I hugged her with all my strength, feeling the tears come back. My girl, my precious girl. I missed you so much, she said, her little face against my shoulder. I missed you too, my love, I replied, every single day. We spent the whole afternoon together. I made her favorite snack, cookies and hot chocolate. We played in the yard. I showed her the old photos of when her dad was a boy. We laughed. We talked. We made up for lost time. Michael watched us from the kitchen doorway with a smile. Thank you, Mom, he said in a low voice. Don't thank me, I replied. This is how it always should have been. That night, after they left, I sat in the living room and looked around. The house felt different. It felt alive. It felt like a home again. Carol came to visit the next day. She wanted to know how I was. I told her everything. About Michael. About Sophia. About the reunion. I knew they'd be back, she said with a smile. True love always finds its way back. The following weeks were the happiest I had had in years. Michael came to visit me twice a week. Sometimes alone. Sometimes with Sophia. Little by little, we rebuilt our relationship. He helped me with things around the house. He fixed what was broken. He mowed the lawn. We did the things we used to do before Claire showed up. And Sophia. My sweet Sophia. She stayed with me on the weekends. We cooked together. We watched movies. I taught her to knit, just like my mother had taught me. One afternoon, while we were making cookies, Sophia looked at me with her big eyes. Grandma, she asked, why didn't Claire want us to see you? I took a deep breath. Sometimes, my love, people do bad things because they're scared. Claire was afraid you would love me more than her. And that's why she lied? Sophia asked. Yes, my love, that's why she lied. Sophia hugged me. I always loved you, Grandma. Always. And I will always love you, I replied, kissing her forehead. The house that Claire had tried to take from me was now full of life again, of laughter, of love, of real family. I had won more than a court case. I had gotten my son back. I had gotten my granddaughter back. I had gotten my life back. And no one, ever again, was going to take it from me. 6 months have passed since the hearing. 6 months since I unmasked Claire. 6 months since I got my life back. Now, sitting in my living room with a hot cup of tea in my hands, I can look back and see the whole path I traveled. All the pain, all the fear, all the loneliness. But also all the strength I found when I thought I had nothing left. My house is still mine. Every wall, every corner, every memory. No one took it from me. No one erased me. No one made me disappear. Michael comes to see me every week. Sometimes he brings food. Sometimes he just comes for coffee and to talk. We are healing, slowly, carefully. How do you heal deep wounds? 2 weeks ago he asked for my forgiveness again. I told him I had already forgiven him. But he insisted. He needed to say it. He needed me to know that he didn't forget what he had done. Mom, he told me that afternoon, I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel alone again, that you never doubt your worth. And he has kept his word, not with words, with actions, with presence, with true love. Sophia has become my favorite companion. Saturdays are ours. We cook together. We watch movies. I tell her stories about when her dad was a boy. She laughs and hugs me and tells me I'm the best grandma in the world. And I believe her, because now I know I am, not because I'm perfect, but because I'm present, because I love her unconditionally, because I will never abandon her like I was abandoned. Last week, Sophia made me a drawing at school. It was of the two of us, her and me hand in front of my house. Above it, she had written in big, uneven letters, "My grandma is my hero." I cried when I saw it, not from sadness, from fullness, from gratitude, from pure love. Carol is still my neighbor and my friend. We have coffee every afternoon. She tells me I look younger now than I did 6 months ago, that my eyes sparkle differently, that I walk with more confidence. And she's right, because now I know who I am. I know what I'm worth. I know I deserve respect. I know I deserve love. And I know I don't have to beg for any of those things. Stephen became more than my lawyer. He became my friend. He comes to visit every now and then. He brings me pastries from the bakery downtown. We sit in the yard and talk about life. He tells me my case was one of the most satisfying of his career, not because we won, but because he saw how a woman found her strength when everyone thought she had lost it. I thank him every time I see him, because without him, I don't know what would have happened. Maybe Claire would have won. Maybe I'd be in some nursing home, forgotten, erased from my family's life. But that didn't happen. And it's not going to happen. Because now I'm awake. Now I'm alert. Now I know how to recognize when someone is trying to manipulate me. I haven't heard from Claire again. Michael told me she disappeared from the city after the divorce. That she tried to contact him once to ask for money. That he told her no and blocked her number. He asked me if I felt resentment toward her. I told him no. That feeling resentment would be giving her power over me, and she no longer has any power over me. I feel sorry for her, for being such an empty person that she has to steal to feel full, for being so broken that she has to break others to feel whole. But it's not my problem. Not anymore. I have learned so many things in these months. I've learned that silence is not peace, that justifying the unjustifiable is not love, that allowing mistreatment is not being a good person. I've learned that setting boundaries is not selfishness, that defending myself is not being a bad mother, that demanding respect is not being difficult. I've learned that my value doesn't depend on how much I give, but on who I am. And I am a 69-year-old woman who survived her husband's death, who raised a son alone, who worked her whole life, who almost lost everything, and who stood up stronger than ever. I am Eleanor Reynolds, and my name is no accident, because I have a soul. I have spirit. I have fire. Sometimes I wonder what I would say to other women who are going through the same thing. To those grandmothers, those mothers, those widows who are being manipulated, abandoned, erased by their own families. I would tell them they are not alone. That what they're feeling is real, that the pain is valid, that betrayal hurts more when it comes from those you love most. I would tell them not to make excuses, not to look for justifications for those who mistreat them, that true love doesn't exclude. It doesn't abandon. It doesn't demand you give up everything. I would tell them to seek help, to speak up, to not stay silent, that there are good people like Stephen, like Carol, like Dr. Evelyn, who are willing to help. I would tell them to fight, to not give away what it took them a lifetime to build, that their homes, their savings, their dignity are theirs, and that no one has the right to take them. And I would tell them that there is still time, that as long as there is life, there is hope, that it doesn't matter how old they are, that it's never too late to defend themselves, to stand up, to take back control of their lives. Last night before bed, I went to my husband's room. I still keep some of his things there. His watch, his favorite sweater, our wedding photo. I sat on the bed and talked to him like I do sometimes. I told him everything that had happened. I told him I had defended our home, that I had fought for our family, that I had been strong, just as he always knew I could be. And I felt his presence, not physically, but in my heart. I felt he was proud, that he was at peace, that he knew I was going to be okay. This morning I woke up early. I made coffee. I went out to the yard to water the plants. The sun was just starting to rise, and the air was cool. I looked at my house from the outside. This house I almost lost. This house that represents everything I am, everything I've worked for, everything I love. And I smiled. Because it's still mine. Because I'm still me. Because no one could take away what really matters. My dignity. My strength. My self-worth. Michael is coming for lunch today. He's bringing Sophia. We're going to eat in the yard like we used to. We're going to laugh. We're going to remember. We're going to build new memories on the rubble of the old ones. And tonight, when everyone leaves and I'm alone in my house, I'm going to sit in my living room, in my favorite armchair, and I'm going to feel gratitude. Gratitude for having survived, for having fought, for having won. Gratitude for the people who supported me. For those who believed in me when I had almost stopped believing in myself. Gratitude for every tear I shed, because those tears cleansed me, they freed me, they transformed me. And gratitude for this second chance, to be able to watch my granddaughter grow, to be able to rebuild my relationship with my son, to be able to live my last years in peace, surrounded by true love, because that's what I deserve. That's what we all deserve. We don't deserve to be erased. We don't deserve to be manipulated. We don't deserve to be treated as if we are a problem. We deserve love. We deserve respect. We deserve dignity. And if we have to fight for it, we fight. Calmly. With strategy. With the truth on our side. Because the truth always wins. It might take time. It might hurt. But in the end, it always wins. I won. And you can win too. You just have to take the first step. Seek help. Speak up. Don't stay silent. And remember that as long as there is life, as long as there is breath, as long as there is strength in your heart, there is always hope. There is always a way to rise. There is always a way to reclaim what is ours. Now I ask you, all of you who are listening to me, all of you who have lived through something similar, have you ever felt like they were trying to erase you from your own story? Have you ever had to fight for what was yours? Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? If the answer is yes, I want you to know that I see you, that I hear you, that your pain is real and valid, and that it is never, ever too late to get your voice back. I am Eleanor Reynolds. I am 69 years old, and this is my story. A story of pain, of betrayal, of loss, but also a story of strength, of dignity, of victory. And if I could do it, you can too. Never forget that.